So Daniel Bove, what's your official title with the Pelicans?
I'm a director of performance for the New Orleans Pelicans NBA team.
So you oversee medical and performance, or just performance?
Just performance. So the strength and conditioning, the physical prep, and the sports science, a lot of the performance analytics, that kind of falls under my umbrella.
So how many staff do you oversee?
So right now I've got three right now.
How did you arrive at the job you're at now, coming out of college?
So I always make the joke that like I owe YouTube a percentage of my salary right now because when I got out of grad school, so I actually started out, and I don't know if you want me to get into this now, but I started out, got my undergrad at Penn State, kinesiology. I worked in CrossFit for about 2.5 years, a full-time CrossFit coach in Philly, and then went to grad
by
school.
choice or just by circumstance?
By choice. I wanted to, like, when I was in college, when I was in undergrad, I fell in love with the sport of CrossFit. I wanted to be a competitive CrossFit athlete. And when you fall into that, if you want to be a competitive athlete in CrossFit, you got to be around it all the time and you got to live in the gym. And the only way I could do that is if I was actually working as a coach. So, I got into kinesiology and graduated the degree, worked full time in that, but then kind of was like, you know what? Like, this is cool and all, but I really want to work with like the high end, like Ferrari athlete. Right. And like, that's what I wanted to do. So I went to grad school, worked there, met some amazing people, got out of grad school and got married. When I got married, I couldn't get a job. It's a saturated market the same way it is now. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So it's so hard to get your foot in the door anywhere. You got to do like 3 internships before you get an assistant position wherever. I couldn't even get internships with a master's degree. So I end up going back to CrossFit right after grad school. I found a gym in Philly that hired me back on full time, started working there, living with my in-laws. But I had so much time in the middle of my day. I had like a break from pretty much, 11 to like 4 every day. And I spent 7 days a week from 11 to 4 surfing YouTube for how to basically answer some of the questions that I was trying to answer from a KPI standpoint, just working with CrossFit athletes, tracking workload, internal, external, trying to, just come up with ways to track performance and energy system stuff. And I fell in love with that perspective. And John Light from Excel Tricks for Sports, I literally I was doing like 5 or 6 hours of that per day. And just every video that he put up, I'm just up there and I'm just trying to make my own version of it. And you start to kind of become addicted to it almost. And what ended up happening is, there was a couple conversations with some MLB teams that wanted me, didn't really work out, but then they actually bridged the gap with the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Braves kind of called me about some stuff with Andrew Hauser, who's now with the Dodgers. It didn't work out with Andrew, but they put me in touch with the Atlanta Hawks, and basketball was the sport I wanted to work with. So
was that when Art Horn was there, like prior to the Celtics, or was that like after he left to go to the Celtics?
Art Horn was still there. So we had an all-star staff. We had Art Horn there. We had Mike Roncarati. We had Chris Chase. Yep. We had Zach Markowitz, who actually sadly passed away a couple years ago. KK Lyles. We had an amazing staff. Scotty Parker and all phenomenal practitioners. And I was really lucky for that to be my first team. But yeah, basically the Atlanta Braves put me in touch with them, and they asked for a portfolio. So I basically was like, oh, I got a portfolio. So I unleashed the hellgates of everything I fucking did with, in that 6-7 months that I was just surfing YouTube, learning skills, learning some R, learning some Excel, sent them what I had. They loved it. And then I joined, thought I knew what I was doing. And then I got into the fire, and it was like, okay, this is way different. This isn't a laboratory.
And where did you go from there?
So I was with Atlanta Hawks for 2 years as an assistant strength coach / sports science coordinator, whatever you want to call it. And then I was hired by the Phoenix Suns as their director of performance, overseeing strength and conditioning and sports science.
That's a fucking rapid rise, brother.
Oh my gosh, it was
crazy. How did you find that?
What's that?
How did you find that? Because I know, like, for me, I went from being an intern to working in international rugby in 3 years, and I thought I was ready, and I was not.
Yeah, no, and I definitely wasn't ready, and it was one of those fake it till you make it / like, you don't really know till you know, and like you just got to do it. It's like you're never ready, right? But like that's how it felt for me at least. And the way it happened was we actually had an assistant athletic trainer for the Hawks who got hired to Phoenix.
Yeah.
Phoenix was actually they had another person signed up to be their director of performance. It fell through last minute, and I just happened to be at like basically it was the NBA Combine where and there was like cocktail hours and all these events going on where all these practitioners from all the teams were there. And I ended up running in Aaron Nelson, and it was introduced to him by my colleague at the Hawks. And
that's how Artie got, Artie from the Lakers.
Oh yeah. No,
Artie got hired. I want to say it was for the Spurs from the Combine. Same deal.
I mean, I hate forced networking, but like a lot of networking that happens at the Combine, like there's so much organic conversations that happen there, and it's a fun time, and you meet so many cool people. But yeah, no, that's kind of how it happened. And then Aaron Nelson, me and him hit it off, and I wasn't really like, it was not like I met him and I was like trying to get a job. We just had some really good conversations, and it ended up being that it fell through with the director of performance that they were going to hire. And he asked my skill set. I told him, and we interviewed, and we kind of just kept the ball rolling, and he loved it, and he hired me. So that's kind of how it worked out. And
I have an idea about, obviously big plug for the book. It is a very, very good book, I have to say. I have an idea about the people that would have informed the coming together of this system, but who have been the major influences in you coming up with the Quadrant System? And also, is it you're inheriting this at the Hawks and developing it, or is it literally, is this your baby?
No, it's definitely my baby, but it's like you said, it's a culmination of so many people and conversations, ideas I've spoken to them about, and like advice I've gotten from people. But definitely, Dean Little, Dave Taylor. I don't know if you know Dean Little and Dave Taylor, but they were huge. They worked for the Memphis Grizzlies at the time when I came into the league as their 2 sports science guys, and they really helped me with and my philosophy on quote unquote load management, how you monitor workloads, and they were really influential in how I approached that. But Mike Roncarati, who was our director of rehab, he really helped me. Phenomenal with biomechanics and load and all the things that went into the book. But then Jeff Dolan, actually, who I know you're friends with and you work with as well, he actually was a former triathlete at a high level. Like
I did not know that about him, because he is friggin' yoked.
Yeah, he's huge. But if you look at pictures from him from like 10 years ago, like he looks like a triathlete, and was a very high end, like highly ranked triathlete in the United States. But he has a great background in energy system training and really how to periodize. And when I met Jeff in grad school, like me and him geeked out, and we actually became really close because of us trying to understand periodization in team sport and trying to like kind of develop some of these concepts. And then coming from a CrossFit background in myself, I think that's a huge part of the book too, because when you're in CrossFit, you've got so many modalities of training that you're trying to balance and like periodize, like whether it's, you're trying to make a guy be it's all concurrent, right? And I'm trying to make a guy be a phenomenal snatch or clean and jerker, but then also be able to run a mile sub-6 and be able to deadlift 500.
Walks, all that kind of stuff.
And yeah, and you got to go long and you got to go short and you got to go the in-between, which everyone hates the in-between stuff, but like, if you're a CrossFitter, you have to be able to do it. But it gave me an appreciation for how things fit like a puzzle. And then the people who I worked with in the NBA at the NBA level, they helped me kind of refine it. And then when I got to the Suns, Corey Schlesinger was a huge part in and our conversations and what we did in the trenches together with actually getting it to work with athletes and how we planned it out and how we implemented it. Like he was really crucial on that end. So and there's people I left out of the conversation that like 100% had something to do with it, but those are the ones that come to mind like immediately.
That's surprising to me, because none of those were the names that I had in mind. I was thinking like James Smith, Dan Paff, Raymond Verheyen, like tactical periodization, like all that kind of stuff, because they are big for talking about like consolidation of stresses and trying to think about how what you do in the weight room marries up with what you're doing on the field or court. And but yeah, did you read those guys like?
Yeah, 100%. And if I'm talking about authors, like those are the guys that I loved reading, especially I mean James Smith, like the thinker, is like phenomenal. Big fan. But also Charlie Francis, some of his stuff.
Yeah.
Like big, like, and I think a lot of that, because I know Jeff Dolan is so like well read in those areas, that a lot of times my conversations with him are involving that literature, and so I'm sure attributing it sometimes is tough because I learn it from Jeff, and then I just I go about it, and
So one of the things, if we kind of like tie in Charlie Francis in the book, the thing about Charlie Francis is the counterintuitive. Like when you speak to novice coaches and athletes, they think, oh, well, I don't want to get tired, so I'm going to lift on this day, I'm going to sprint on this day, I'm going to jump and throw on this day. When in reality, you're not spreading that stress out. You're actually you're shooting yourself in the foot and getting rid of opportunities for recovery. So it's counterintuitive that you want to consolidate stresses onto the same days. And then, like, to piggyback off of Dan Path, if there's different flavors of stress, you want to pair them up together. So for example, to use a track and field example, if you're working top end speed, it might be that you're doing like twitchy reactive stuff in the gym and not like deep squats and higher rep ranges. So in a nutshell, would you agree the quadrant system is basically why do you do what you do and when do you do it, with reference to the intensity and the volume of sport practice, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it right there. And it's consolidating stress, both sport specific and then like general physical preparation. How do you marry them together? And then it's an attempt at flexibly periodizing it throughout the year.
Yeah. Now, in terms of, I think you do a good job of saying what you can do this by feel. Hey, if you're doing mostly this on the court this day, it's probably going to be this day or this or this or this. But when you look at intensity and duration or like volume of sport practice, are you like using Z-scores, standard deviations to try and understand like which quadrant stuff's going to be?
Yeah, I've done all the above. Like with this system, I've tried to be really, really like granular with the load information. Yeah. And then I've gone to the point where a lot of that stuff correlates so especially on the volume side, it all correlates so highly with time on feet. Like we're talking like R squareds of like over 90 or 0.9. And it's it's like I'm better off using like time on feet as a volume metric when it comes to what we're trying to do. And then and I talk about this in the book, but I mean, you can use intensity. I mean, you can use high speed distance per minute, or you can use something like high intensity accelerations per minute, whatever for your axis. But really it comes down to like the live basketball play is going to be on the right side, which is quadrant 3 and 4. And then the non-live play is going to be on the left side. And so it becomes really simple and simplistic. And I've done it like with the analytics, and then I've done it with the feel and the just knowing once you've been around.
It becomes an arms race. Like if you ask grown men, hey, do this drill and don't compete, 2 minutes out the window. Like anything opposed, they're going to compete. There's going to be that arms race. It's going to end up being high intensity. Exactly. So unless like you've got like, like I would say like drilling in jiu-jitsu. Right. There's drilling and there's sparring and there's nothing in between.
Dude, that's such a good, like the duality of like light and hard. It's like there is nothing in the middle. At least at the NBA level, like I see it. That's how I see it for sure.
Have you ever incorporated the system with other sports?
I have not, but I have so many friends who work other sports that are in that process right now.
So, I mean, I mentioned to you off the air that the names that I said to you, like Dan Path and James Smith, Fergus Connolly. So I'd kind of stumbled on probably like an ugly version of this when I was in Japan and I was trying to implement this. And again, Japanese rugby is the highest paid league in the world with the lowest level of professionalism. So it's
not know that.
But you go in there and immediately they're like, oh, we want to spread it out. We want to do, we don't want to do weights on Tuesday. Tuesday in rugby is your highest day of the week. We don't want to do weights on Tuesday. The guys are tired. And I'm like, yeah, but on Wednesday we can rest. So I was going to ask you, the problem that I encountered is that probably, I mean, this may be just Japanese rugby, but we would do speed on field in the AM prior to team rugby, and we would go hard in rugby. Then we would do units in the afternoon, so like scrummaging, rucking, mauling. That's the high contact day. Then, because of my desire to consolidate those stresses, that's when we would be doing our quadrant 4 lifting last thing in the day. And everyone was drinking sappuccinos. They were not keen at all. So what I ended up doing was, because of that revolt, I flipped it to the repetition day. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation. Maybe it's something that's specific to rugby. It's a little bit more grueling on the longer days than basketball.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, I tried so hard in the introduction of the book to be very like open about like this model, like where I'm coming from is basketball, but like I want people to be creative and use it and tweak it for their sport. And like, I can't speak to how guys would respond in a contact sport like rugby or football. So like, I would completely trust like that. You're a practitioner in the moment doing that.
I've done it in football though. I have done it in football. So we almost did a perfect version of this. Well, let me say perfect in like we lined everything up. We still sucked, but we did it at William and Mary, where we again there's these kind of like esoteric things with the schedule and NCAA, but we would do our repetition stuff on Sunday post game. Monday you have to give them a day off. Tuesday would be our quadrant 4 day. Wednesday would be our speed day. Thursday is like a walkthrough, and then Friday we would do another speed day to potentiate, prior to the game. So
and that's I mean, and there's times when, I mean, don't get me wrong, like you can't be a slave to any system. Like I try not to be a slave to it, and there's so many days where we have a game day lift where maybe I'm using the repetition method, and sometimes that's based on too. If I know what the schedule is for the next 3, 4, 5 days, I might say, you know what, we've got a kind of an easy schedule coming up. I'm going to push the volume a little bit for you. We're going to do some like tissue work for you. And we're going to maybe go into the quadrant 2, even though it should be a 4. And like, we always do that kind of stuff. But then also like you have to be, we deal with a lot of personalities at the NBA level and guys of differing ages. And then you've worked with it.
I was going to ask you about that.
It's like, so what you might do with an 18 to 24-year-old, who's in their prime physically, might be different than what you do with a 33-year-old, 12-year vet, like who's banged up. And
it must be one of those sports where you get such a huge span, because you have these guys that go, one and done. They're in the league at 18, 19. And then you can have guys that are in their late 30s. That's like super rare for a professional sport.
Not only that, so it's like that is such a big part of it, the span age-wise, but then also when you're dealing with a veteran, some of these vets, they move around so much, and they might have been with 5 strength coaches at the NBA level and every strength coach did something different. Yeah. So you're trying to, not only are you trying to do the best job you can, but you're trying to actually like find out like, okay, what do they know? What have they experienced? What has worked for them? Because, there's something to be said about a 12-year NBA vet probably knows a good amount of like what's going to work for his body. They know.
Your job is to facilitate someone like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So
whereas
it's like
an 18, 19-year-old, your job is to teach them.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't square peg round hole a vet. Like you got to come to the table trying to meet them halfway or even go a little further than that.
Sorry, I was going to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
So sort of like seizing opportunities and windows of opportunity to understand what you can take from it and the residual effects. Like you said, like, we're going to have a couple of 5 easy days. I can sprinkle this and it'll mean something for, the future or the near future, and the difference between an 18 and a 34-year-old. That's the age span I had in the sevens team as well, where our high-low days were different just by contact. And it was funny because the coach would say like, oh, today was going to be light contact. There's no such thing as light contact. Wait until the first big hit comes in, and then it's all hard contact. So getting a 34-year-old with a 14-year-old career in rugby sevens, and me coming in my first year, I was like, so how would you like it? So there's things you'll say, hey, I'll definitely won't let you do that. And there's some things I don't mind, and we definitely have to do this, like divide it. I don't want to go against the quadrant, but I only had like 3 splits. I'm sorry about that. I'll get a 4th.
You're good, man. You're good.
So, the basketball culture, it's definitely not the Pelicans, but I've heard about other teams where, the strength coach would prescribe a workout, take an athlete through the workout, and then the player would say nothing, leave the session, call the agent calls the GM calls the head of performance, and then the head of performance calls the strength coach into the office and be like, oh, he doesn't like this. That is a fairly unique culture in basketball, probably soccer. You tend to find in rugby and football, you have to be pulling them back. How have you found that like basketball culture and developing like a culture of training hard? Because if you adhere to the quadrant system, you're going to have to train hard.
Yeah. That's an amazing question. And yeah, like I definitely hear of that happening throughout the league, through a lot of professional sports, especially in the West. I see a lot of that happening. But also, I think you definitely got, and I don't know if this answers your question, but I think when you hire good people who you think are, who you know are good communicators, who can build trust with these athletes. And like, I'll be honest with you, like NBA guys, they have phenomenal feel, and they can feel when you're faking it. And when you're unsure of like, how good of a job you're doing, or you're unsure of the sport of basketball and how what you're doing applies to sports performance in basketball.
They can smell fear like a cow.
They can smell it and fear. And I think you need to hire people who are confident, who can communicate really well. And the issue that you brought up with like, whisper down the lane and going all the way around and coming back to the performance director and then having to talk to the strength coach. I think you eliminate a lot of that when you hire really good communicators who have feel and can sense when a player is feeling a certain way. And we're blessed at the Pelicans to have a phenomenal staff with, I think, one of the best staffs in the league, and great communicators, but then also really good practitioners. So I would say that's a huge part of, I think, preventing that type of dynamic from occurring.
I think if one of the reasons that I think sometimes this happens is pay disparity and disposability. So if you're in the unfortunate position of interacting with a guy that makes $20 million a year, and they know that they're a franchise player and you're just a strength coach, a couple of $100,000 a year, and it's like, hey, you can be chopped. I know someone that's, Jadeveon Clowney in the weight room. Oh, Jadeveon, this is the session today. And you're like, no, I'm good. But I do wonder if of those 4 quadrants, you'd almost introduce them in the numbered order as to like, hey, little wins, like, how much effort does it take to do some coordination stuff with an aqua bag if you want to do it? How much, jumping and sprinting, lifting, bicep curls, that kind of shit, and then get them under a trap bar or squat bar.
100%. And actually that's a great point. And quadrant 2, it's such a capacity type of day. And I put yielding isometrics where it's like, you're fighting gravity. Maybe it's a 30 to 45 second hold in different positions, precarious positions, whatever you're trying to do. But, being able to control those positions before you move on to the more dynamic efforts, like that's a huge part of our program too. Slow to fast, that type of sequence, which is used in a ton of other ways in sports.
That's soreness too.
Yeah, 100%. So
do you ever you obviously write about like the more the chaos, the less predictability. Do you ever just tear this up and go with a straight like concurrent within a day, kind of like a tier thing where we're going to do something fast, something heavy, something repetition, and we're just going to rotate that as we go throughout the week?
You mean on like one given day, doing all 3 of those on a day?
So for example, if, I don't know, for whatever reason, travel, lack of facilities, you don't know how many minutes the guy is going to have, rather than say, today's going to be our heavy, slow day. Today's going to be our fast day. It's going to be, right, we're going to pick, for me personally, whenever I'm in doubt, 1 lower body, 1 push, 1 pull, something heavy, something fast, something rep, and we just rotate through those as we go along, because I know I'm never going to be more than a few days away from hitting a pattern or a quality.
Yeah, no, now I understand your question. Yeah, 100%. Cannot be a slave to the system. There's so many times when, based on travel, I mean, NBA travel it's brutal. I mean, 82 games, 41 on the road, and that's just regular season. If you make the playoffs, you're playing 100 games in a year.
Yeah,
that's 50 games on the road, and that's not even, you got preseason too. So you're on the road a lot, and you're switching time zones. You're going East Coast to West Coast to Central, and then you got to regroup, go home, and you go back out. And so your body never knows what time it is. And there's so many times when we lose time going East, or that we I have to scrap what was supposed to be a 3 or a 4, go with a 1 or a 2, and then vice versa. There's days when maybe I know that it was supposed to be a 3 or 4, but because of the guys' because of their readiness and how they were responding to volume and travel, maybe I make it a 1 or 2. Well, then at that point, I know that we're probably losing a little bit of our adaptation. So then I might sprinkle in a 3 on a 4 on a day that should be a 1 or a 2. And then I find a way using feel to catch up to where the plan originally was going to take us. So no, and I think good practitioners, I think good practitioners will do that. And I want to say this is I was talking to Corey Schlesinger about this, and I've talked to a bunch of people about this, but like what I'm doing, it's not what I wrote about in the book isn't anything novel or new. All I did was I tried to take what really experienced good coaches already do and have feel for, and I tried to map it out on paper, put it on paper and let. Now I think younger and like more inexperienced coaches can take the book and maybe that'll speed up their development and how they go about it.
Because you're a jiu-jitsu guy, one of the more insightful things I picked up this year was John Danaher, and he said the role of the teacher is to make the implicit explicit. So you're not a teacher until you can articulate exactly what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. But then the goal of the athlete is to take the explicit and make it implicit, so it's automatic. So it's almost like you're working in opposite directions. It blew my mind.
That's an amazing, first of all, Danaher is a savage, and he's a brilliant guy, as you know.
Now, you need to get the job at UT so you can just go train at his gym.
I love that though. I love that idea. I'm gonna steal that.
Yeah. So I mean, in season, you have this crazy long in-season period. When they're not in season, you're not really working with them. You're going to be, limited exposures. One thing I wanted to ask you about is game day. So is it the most you can play? Is it 3 and 5?
So, so 3 and 5, it happens. We've had, there's been 4 and 5s. There's been 3 and 5s. Our schedule is actually pretty forgiving this year. We don't really have any 3 and 5s, which we're happy about. But the last year we had a condensed season because of COVID. They basically shaved a month off the season and they pushed it together a little bit. They actually took some games away, but it was still condensed as hell.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that inspired the quadrant system, because the schedule is so variable. Sometimes the microcycle is 3 days between the games. Some days it's 2, some days it's 1, and it's constantly changing. So, which means the plan is often changing, and for good reason too. Because I mean, our sport coaches have great feel for where our guys are, and what was supposed to be a practice might end up not being a practice, or vice versa, based on where guys are at physically. So then I needed a system that could allow me to do a decision matrix in the moment. Like, okay, hey coach, we playing live today? Okay, yes, we are. How long are they going to be at practice? How long are they going to be playing? And then that gives me the quadrant they're in. And then it's like, okay, I have my menu of exercises for my guys because you just told me like, yes, or whatever,
Yeah. So with the games being the highest volume, highest intensity stuff they're doing, I'm guessing the answer is if they've got a day off the next day, that's going to be a heavy lift. If you know that maybe they have another game to go or it's a practice, it's going to be like a speed day. Mm-hmm. Is that the thought process that goes into it?
100%. You knocked it out of the park. That's exactly what we do.
How are you doing those heavy lifts on game day though? Because I can see a case for like high speed, high power stuff being done in the AM for a PM tip off. Mm-hmm. But like my preference, I tried to do it in rugby, was never allowed, would be for low minute reserves to do a heavy lift post game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does that go down in basketball?
We actually get even our high minute guys, a lot of our high minute guys and our low minute guys post game. If it's a quadrant 4 day, they're doing their heavy lifts post game. It gets a little dicey on the road, and that's one of those. Depends on which arena you're at. Some arenas can accommodate large groups for workouts after games. Some can't. So you're obviously, it's based on logistics as well. But you try to get them in on game day. It makes planning through the week a lot easier when you can load them on those days. But then I've also, in the NBA, there's the shoot around, which happens in the morning, and that's usually a walkthrough and then game in the evening. Those tend to be our highest volume, highest intensity days. So that's a 4 for us. You're getting a huge amount of time off feet.
Yeah.
But then you also have days in the NBA where whether it's an early game, which they cancel the shoot around if you have an early game, if it's like, 3 or 4 in the afternoon, or a noon game, they'll get rid of shoot arounds. Those days are quadrant threes for us because they're just shorter. And then you have some days where coach might give them off from shoot around, and it's just meet at the arena tonight. We'll go over it and then we'll play. And throughout the NBA, every team deals with these type of schedule changes. So when you're mapping out the year, which game days are your threes, which game days are your fours. When we have a 3, I'll actually allow guys pregame if they want to get their power and speed work in. I'll let them go pregame.
Yeah.
But I think I mentioned this in the book, but I'm not 100%. There's certain guys that rely on really like fine-tune like motor patterns and motor skills, where if you potentiate them too much and make them too jumpy, they won't actually have the finesse and the touch and the softness that they need in the game. So maybe those guys, maybe you hold off and you do it after the game. So
it's certainly not the case in rugby. Like they move like cows.
Power.
Yeah. How do you find that culturally? Let's say you just got your pants pulled down in a game, the mood is not going to be good. How do you find taking guys into a gym for a heavy lift after that?
Ooh, another great
question.
Because
I'll tell you from experience, right? So I made the case, as many have. Immediately post-game is the furthest that we're ever going to be from the next game. So let's take advantage and create stress now, because then everyone else is going to have a day off on Sunday, then we'll come back in on Monday. So I was like, I want to do speed and power work after the game. Oh, we want to play touch and condition. And I was like, I don't give a fuck what you want. This is what we're going to do. And the mood was terrible.
Yeah. See, it's a
case of like, suck it up. Like, you're getting paid millions of dollars. You need to suck it up.
Well, I'll tell you this right now. I would love for that to be what the interaction can be. But if you do that in the NBA, they will laugh at you and they'll tell you to go after yourself. So, but once you've built trust with these guys, they will, if you set the expectation ahead of time, you can't set the expectation where you don't talk to them that whole day. And then all of a sudden you come up to them after and you say, hey, we're lifting. And they just lost by 20, or they got dunked on. Like, I've seen players
posted.
There's one in particular, and I'm not going to say the name, but there's one guy in particular who got posterized pretty badly, and he's always a post-game lifter, and he about threw a bench across the weight room, almost hit one of our players, and I was just like if it would have hit a player, it would have either killed him or severely injured him.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're dealing with that for sure. It's funny, but
is it give some, take some? Like, you'll be willing to make concessions elsewhere to get that.
And it usually is based on how the schedule is developed. It's usually okay on a 4. Listen, you give me that hard lift and you're off tomorrow. Like, you're not coming in the effing weight room tomorrow. I'm going to put some Normatex on you or whatever, and you're going to sit and you're going to chill, and then you're going to have your walkthrough or whatever the light practice is. But yeah, no, 100%. It's all like negotiation, knowing like the communication pathway. And it always helps when they know the plan days in advance, or that day, like earlier in the day, rather than catching them off guard, at halftime telling them, hey, we got a post-game lift. It's like, no, that conversation needed to happen earlier in the day.
Yeah. With regard to, tactical periodization, if you look at the NFL last year, this huge, like, crazy spike in Achilles, and everyone's talking about it like, oh, why does it happen? And I'm like, well, guess what? I'm guessing they kept lifting and they kept sprinting the whole way through. So it's clearly the sport practice, intensity, volume, density, organization of loads that's resulting in those injuries, which just reinforces how important that stuff is for, 1, performance, and 2, health. To what extent are you influencing tactical periodization, planning of practices with sport coaches, or is it still at the reactive phase?
I think right now we have an amazing coaching staff. Willie Green, who actually I worked with in Phoenix, we just hired him on as our head coach, and he's been phenomenal. Great communication. And I think right now, and I still think where you get in the NBA, I can only speak to basketball. I think because of how free flowing the sport is and how dynamic, and it's such an interesting, chaotic sport. I still think like you get 90 to 95% of the benefit of what we're talking about from a performance standpoint, just by communicating things like, how long is practice going to be? How intense is it going to be? If I only know that, and then not only does that help me, as a practitioner to choose what I'm doing in the weight room, but it helps me to talk to coach and say, okay, coach, great. You told me what that's going to be today. What about this next 5 days? If I had to put a number on it, 1 to 4, like the quadrants, what's Tuesday going to be? What's Wednesday going to be? And if all I had on a given day was, or if on a weekly plan, all I had was quadrant 4, quadrant 2, 1, 3, 4, that's enough for me.
Covering your bases.
It covers my bases.
I've had the conversation where it was literally 2 hours a day, 2 hours a day, 2 hours a day, 6 days a week. We do that for 4 weeks. And I'm like, hey, what if on day 1 we did 90 minutes and on day 2 we did 2.5 hours or whatever? And it's like going up like this. They would have looked at me like I had 2 heads.
Yeah.
So I know that it has to be, I feel like, I don't know if you agree, but like the first step before anything has to be the relationship.
Yeah.
Then they have to actually understand what it is you're saying. Then they have to have the desire to do it. Then they have to have the technical ability to actually try and see it through to completion on the field. And then they have to be able to do it in practice and adjust. And it's a long road to get to that point.
100%. 100%. And I've learned a lot. Not only have I learned to do more with less as I've gone in the NBA, but it's like you said it, Kier, like, you gotta, like, those conversations can't happen in the beginning. You gotta develop that relationship, that trust before you just start talking about things like load and
which when you're on a 1 or a 2 year deal, that makes you nervous because you're like, fuck, I need to demonstrate that I'm worth year 3, year 4, year 5.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's another dynamic. That's a whole nother dynamic because you're trying to prove yourself to the people who hired you and brought you in, the stakeholders who pay you. Like, I want the best of the best. And it's like, well, hey, what if I tell you the best is doing the simple things really well? Like, they don't get it. They want the fancy shit.
Yeah.
But not,
I will say this though, what it seems to be that
not the people I work with. The people I work for are great. I'll say that right now. People I've worked for in the past, it's like that exists in the league.
It's like trying to do your job and keep your job are completely different things.
Yeah.
For sure.
At some point. And the end goal is it, like, for us preparation coaches or whatever title we have, is at the end of the day, it's load management, isn't it? Understanding what's going to give you what's going to take, and how can you arrange that for performance. If you can't do load management, you can be, drills, techniques, fancy stuff, whatever, but you can't manage load, then the end goal is just, dead.
There's always the private sector. You can work in the private sector.
You can always work with Stretch Code Network.
Yeah, man. So Daniel, where can people find you and find the book?
Yeah, so the book's on my website, www.athleteframework.com. There it is, right there. I'm on Instagram @Daniel Bove and Twitter @Daniel Bove. So I post a lot on there. I'll be honest with you, Kier, like, you got me into the meme game, bro.
Like, you bring it in. The meme is the bait in the trap. It's the bait in the trap. They bite on the meme, and then you got them for the info.
Yeah. No, trust me. I took notes.
Brother, that's awesome, man. Thank you for your time.
For sure, man. Thank you guys for having me on.
Right, no worries.